Prime Minister Stephen Harper is in Greece this weekend for bilateral meetings. He arrived as the country is in crisis, overwhelmed by debt and struggling to come up with the kind of cuts required to secure badly needed funds. Part of the problem is a political logjam, something Harper told the Greek Prime Minister that he's familiar with.
I know from experience that it is not unusual for opposition parties to refuse to cooperate with the government. But governments have a responsibility to act, and I certainly admire the determination of Prime Minister Papandreou and the very difficult actions he's had to undertake.
Harper said he's also in Greece to learn a few lessons himself.
And Minister Clement sat through those discussions with me, and if for no other reason, so I could assure Minister Clement that as we tackle our own deficit, and as you know, we've said we certainly have to control the growth of expenditures going forward. We have nothing like the challenges faced here in Greece.
But it's not all work for the Prime Minister on this trip. He says he's always been fascinated by Greece, and he used this trip to check out one of its most famous sites, the Acropolis. For the Canadian Press in Athens, I'm Stephanie Levitt.
The future of Greece's government hanging on a vote of confidence later today. It's the latest complication in that country's debt crisis, which threatens to cause problems around the world. CBS News correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is in Athens this morning with the latest. Liz, good morning.
Good morning, Erica. Yes, Greece is the latest European economy to be on life support. A decade of frantic overspending has left it roughly $400 billion in debt. And in order to get a loan, an emergency loan, just to tide it over, just so it doesn't default on its next round of payments, the government is going to have to impose some very punishing austerity measures on an already unhappy group of citizens.
The citizens are fighting back. Last week, demonstrators battled police in downtown Athens, furious about tax hikes they've already suffered, as well as job losses and an overall pay cut of 20%. Unofficial estimates put the real number of unemployed young people at 40%. That's almost 1 in 2 20-somethings out of work. And with time on their hands, many have joined this protest camp outside the Greek parliament. Nick is one recent victim of Greece's shrinking economy.
What happened?
I lost my job. No job, no money, go.
The government isn't good. There's no hope.
This sign says that Greece should just walk away from its massive debt. And it's an idea a lot of Greeks support. The danger is that it could trigger a catastrophic and global financial meltdown.
Greece's Prime Minister George Papandreou wants to avoid triggering a disaster like that.
I'd like to say that we are determined as a country and as a government to be on track with the program.
He ordered an emergency cabinet shuffle to push through even more drastic financial reforms. But the politicians are also praying for mercy from their creditors. The country needs a $17 billion emergency loan, mostly from European banks and governments, by the start of July, just so it can pay the interest on its massive debt.
Now, it does look like they are going to get the money and the government will get the vote of confidence it needs tonight, but not without imposing more austerity measures on people who are suffering here, and that, of course, could trigger even more violence. Erica?
Elizabeth Palmer in Athens this morning. Thanks. Back now to show us how the Greek financial crisis could affect the U.S. and specifically you at home. CBS News business and economics correspondent Rebecca Jarvis. So, I mean, again, it's a terrible situation, but it feels so far away. The reality of it is this could have a direct impact on the United States. How so?
It could, and it has had a direct impact, at least as far as our stock market is concerned. Since April of this year, or really the end of April, when things started to heat up again in Greece, the stock market has lost about $1 trillion in value here at home. In addition to that, there are so many companies here in the United States that do business with Europe. They do business around the world. When Europe suffers, or when Greece suffers, all of a sudden that means less demand for the goods and services that our companies here in the United States create, and as a result, that can directly translate to jobs here at home.
So that's one impact, but it also can have a direct impact on retirement savings for Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about what's happened in the stock market and people go and look at their 401k and they look at their pension fund, all of a sudden what you see is a decline in the value of those items. And so certainly here at home that can have a ripple effect as well on jobs and the overall economy as well.
So what's interesting, though, and you and I were talking about this a little bit in the break, is that in some ways, if this loan is approved and if this goes through, the U.S. and Americans will actually be funding part of it.
Yes, we will, through the IMF. The International Monetary Fund is this international body that is in a position to help bail out, in some cases, countries that require capital money infusions, right? The United States pays the International Monetary Fund as well as countries around the world, and what you have right now is a group of Republican senators that are saying that's not right. We as United States citizens shouldn't be on the hook for Greece's bailout. On the other side, people say, but this whole world is interconnected, and as you see what's happened in our stock market, as you see what's happened in our economy, if we're not thinking in a global way, then all of a sudden we leave ourselves at risk as well. It's a really complicated situation.
It is. It sounds like one of those, you know, kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't in a lot of ways.
It's very true, and that's the problem policymakers are facing right now.
Rebecca Jarvis, thanks as always.